Since taking office in 2009, Brett Guthrie has been representing the people of the 2nd Congressional District of Kentucky in an area that encompasses 21 counties. Guthrie, who comes from a strong manufacturing background, is currently searching out ways to bring jobs back to America. Couple that with a growing crisis in the Mideast, gasoline prices that are skyrocketing, and we've got lots to talk about as we welcome to the program Congressman Brett Guthrie, coming up next on Outlook. Hello and welcome to Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. We go one-on-one today with Congressman Brett Guthrie, who represents the 2nd Congressional District of Kentucky, which encompasses 21 counties. It's a lot of counties.
It's a lot of counties, but it's great counties. And they're changing.
They are changing.
Actually, redistricting, I will go all the way to Garrett County, which is next to Rockcastle County, south of Lexington. So yeah, it's an interest. I was just there this couple days this week hitting Jessamine, Boyle, Mercer, and Garrett are new counties.
Well, how does that affect the job you do?
Well, it's just, distance, but, we're going to serve people in Garrett County just like they were next door neighbors. I told them that because that was a concern people brought up when I was there. They say, you're just so far away. And they were typically with a Lexington member of Congress or that area. And so they were just used to, Lexington's kind of their center of where they shop and do things. And so we're going to work together. And I said, I can't spin it any other way. I do live 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes from Garrett County, from Lancaster. But I will be, give me time to prove myself, and we will. And
one way to do that might be taking a look at these gasoline prices, which are going to have to fuel your vehicle.
Driving over there.
Yes,
absolutely right. I mean, I just paid $3.69 just a few minutes ago. And, what's a shame about it is that, it's because of what's going on in the Middle East. But we have the opportunity to develop our own energy here. I would love that we have electric cars and we could operate on sunlight and wind, but the technology's not here, not at the price we pay now. And the fact that we're not developing our own energy resources, we just passed a bill right before we came home for this recess to be here to do events like this. It's not really vacation, it's out working and being in counties. But we passed a bill that would develop the National Alaska Wildlife Refuge, drilling off the coast of Florida, 12 miles off, so you couldn't see it. When you go to that destination, you wouldn't even see it. Of course, we had the horrific accident a summer and a half ago, almost 2 summers ago, we're approaching it. And that was awful. But, we've been drilling for a long time, and so we essentially shut down that kind of production. And so we can't let the environmental extremists drive our energy production if we want to maintain the lifestyle that we have. And the biggest example is the Keystone Pipeline. The tar sands oil in Canada, or half the volume that we receive from Saudi Arabia. And the pipeline's not a pipeline from Calgary to Houston. A lot of people are saying that it's actually, there's a whole network, a whole spider web of pipelines, and it's connecting into that pipeline system, into the United States and across Nebraska. And the president won't let that go forward. And that oil, the problem is the environmentalists have issue with, and it's true, that tar sands oil doesn't burn as clean as sweet crude from Saudi Arabia. That's a fact. However, we'll burn it cleaner than anyone else. And guess what the Prime Minister of Canada is talking about doing now? He's talking about building the pipeline to Vancouver to go on a ship to cross the Pacific Ocean to go to China. So not only are we not going to have access to the oil, it goes on the world market, I get it, but it also is stable and it's close by if we have it here. So not only are we not going to have the access to the oil, it's going to be burned not as clean as we burn it, and you're not going to gain anything. Matter of fact, I think you'll lose environmentally by doing it.
Now, you're talking about those issues, but when somebody goes to the gas pump, and like you say, they're paying $3.69, I heard in Florida, parts of Florida, it's up to $6 a gallon. They don't want to hear about that. They want to say, what are you going to do to make it better for me when I go to the gas?
Well, what happens is, remember we had $4 gas in 2008, and President Bush at the time says we're going to start drilling off the coast of Florida. Now, his brother was governor, didn't like that, because but it was going to be outside of the view, but it's a sensitive issue in Florida. I understand their tourist trade is important. But what happened? The price started to drop because the people in the Middle East don't want us to develop our own oil because they charge us whatever. So if you have a product, but you say, I'm not going to use the product I have, I'm only going to buy it from you, they're going to charge you a lot different price than they have. Now, I know there's turmoil and there's things going on in the Middle East driving it as well. And that's why we have to develop we have oil shale, and we have access to enough oil to affect the price. When Newt Gingrich says, I'm going to guarantee $2.50 worth of gas, I mean, you can't guarantee that, but in the areas that we're talking about drilling, it's about $65 or $70 a barrel to drill. Right now we're paying, well, it was 108 earlier today. It's probably higher than that now. So, you know, if we could develop our own, but remember they dropped it to where it got down to $1.86. When the president was sworn into office, it was $1.86 a gallon, above a high of 4. So I know it takes a while to develop the resources, but the fact we're doing it will affect the world marketplace immediately.
Why one day this price, the next day, you know, it goes down 40, and it depends where you get it and that kind of thing. People don't really understand why it works that way.
We're beholden to the Middle East because we don't develop our own resources. And we need to do alternatives. I'm all for that, but there's not an alternative form of energy to power our economy, be it coal or oil, at the prices we pay now. And so there are a lot of people, and you know, the president talked about when cap and trade, energy prices are going to skyrocket. Now, we were able to block that in the Senate, but they're implementing a lot of it through regulation. So a lot of the people in his administration, the Secretary of Education is, Secretary of Energy is one. Secretary Chu that said we need to have high prices for fossil fuels because that will drive innovation in the alternatives.
And drive the market.
But it also drives our economy down, and that's the sad thing about it. I'm afraid it's going to put us back into another recession because people are already having to make decisions about, well, now I still have to fill my car up with gas. I still have to drive to work. You may not do the drive to Nashville to dinner or something such as that. You cut that kind of thing out, but you can't completely cut out your driving. You got to get your kids to school, so it takes money right out of people's pocketbooks.
Back into another recession. You heard him say it here. We're going to talk more about that and how we're going to concerned about that and bringing those jobs back to America when Outlook continues right after this. And before we get on talking about jobs, let's clarify something that we said before the break. You know, with the current situation, with what's happening at the gas pumps, and you know, if you've been there lately to get gasoline, you know how the price has skyrocketed. You talk about the fact that it has a lot to do with what's happening in the Middle East, and in essence, they're holding us hostage for that oil.
We don't develop our own. We can't get permit, and we're seeing it in coal. There were 60 people apply for coal permits in Kentucky. 2 were granted last year, and none of them developed because of the way the permit was written. They didn't even open new mines. So that's going to affect. That will reverberate through the economy too, through electric rates. And so the policies coming from this administration really are affecting the prices of energy.
Well, and before the break, you were talking about that you are concerned that this could put us back into another recession because people have to eat, they have to work, you know, they have to drive their cars to get to their
Well, even if we are in recovery, some people debate we are. Things are better than they were 2 years ago. There's no doubt about it. But I don't really think we're actually in recovery. There's still a lot of people hurting. And so now you add this gas price. I think that's what was the pin that pricked the bubble. We were living in a bubble financed by Freddie Mae. Government policy really put us in a housing bubble. And all of a sudden, people were kind of living on the edge, and then gas prices went up, and people cut back. And that was the pin that pricked the bubble. And I'm afraid it's going to be the pin that pricks the bubble that we're trying to grow our economy.
Trying to recover. Well, earlier this week, on February 6th, President Obama released his budget proposal, his plan, and you have some definite comments related to that.
Very much so. You know, the thing I hear from most people, one's jobs in the economy, now you're hearing gas prices. But it's the debt that we're leaving our children and grandchildren. And what kind of future will they have? The president's budget, these are his numbers. He raises taxes on millionaires, billionaires, and corporate jet owners, as he says. It's actually $250,000. So if you're a medium-sized business trying to grow, and you're going to be affected by this. But he raises all the taxes he goes around talking about, and he still has, it would go from $15 trillion in debt to $26 trillion in debt. Now, when I say $15 trillion in debt, where we are now, that was established by Republicans and Democrats, both parties. So if anybody wants to blame somebody for the past, they can blame either side because both are guilty.
And does blame really do the trick?
Well, that's my point.
Yeah.
So why blame? We can blame both sides. Let's show what we're going to do differently. And he didn't want to make the tough. Matter of fact, he raises taxes but spends more money. And I've even had people say, well, why don't, you know, I would pay a little more if it went to deficit reduction. Well, he raises it, but he spends money. The only savings that he really has in his budget is about $40 billion a year of a $1.2 trillion deficit. And but he claims savings from the war, which we hope we'll have our troops home by end of next year. But having them by the end of next year and then saying, well, we're not going to spend $1 trillion over the next 10 because we're bringing them home, that's money we wouldn't have spent anyway. So there's a lot of gimmicks in his budget, which is disappointing because I think we need leadership. We're going to put out a budget from the House that shows a path to fiscal sanity. And
fiscal sanity, implying that fiscal insanity is running rampant? Well,
Greece has 164% of Greece's debt to economy, GDP to debt, that's what we call it. But their debt is 164% of their economy. So right now ours is 100%. It's 14 trillion economy with almost 50. Well, we'll go to 26 trillion under him. And we're approaching double the debt to our economy. And no society's been able to sustain that. I think he knows that. But I don't think he wants to play out what he wants to do before November.
Before November. So this has to do.
That's not leadership.
Well, that's what you're saying. So you're saying he's not leading, he's not making the tough decisions, and much of that he's playing politics.
We're
he's
just
waiting to see.
Pathway to go. He didn't have to agree with us, but we all understand we can't have $26 trillion. We can't have a debt that's twice of our economy. So show us a pathway. We'll show a pathway, and then that's where you could do the negotiations to solve. We're going to show a pathway to solve the problem. We did it last year, if you remember, and that's actually when he started his campaigning. When we put out the Republican budget, someone called it the Ryan budget, that saves Medicare, reforms it and saves it, actually changes Medicaid, which is complete, and we're on the campus of Western Kentucky University. So, every student here is affected by the growth in Medicaid because state support for universities are getting diverted into the Medicaid program, which gets even bigger because of the health care bill. And tuition rises because the university still has to function with less state support.
So how's the Republican-controlled Congress going to gain control of this deficit? I mean,
well, we've had a budget out last year, and we don't we don't balance as fast as we want to, because what we do, we grandfather everybody 55 and older into Medicare. Remember 1992, Ross Perot had his charts going around saying the baby boomers are going to be retiring within a generation.
They're retiring right now, hello.
1946 to 1964, which is mine. When all of us are retired and all the baby boomers are retired, 100% of federal revenues will be Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, when 80% of Medicaid is spent on elderly. So essentially, my generation is going to tell our children, and my parents are a little younger than most baby boomer parents because I'm the end of it, but the typical baby boomer descends from the greatest generation. So the children of the greatest generation are going to be the generation that says, you need to go to work every day so we can be retired. And we have to reform that and protect people who are already there.
Well, we know we have to reform it. We have to curtail
we have a plan to do it. We actually have a plan to do it.
And you have a plan.
We've put it out last year. If you're 54 or younger, you'll be under a different Medicare plan. And your Medicare plan will be an insurance plan, not a fee-for-service plan like we have, the different programs we have. If you're 54 or younger, it will be equivalent to a federal employee health benefit program. So what we're saying, we can balance the budget, pay down the debt, move our country forward by the time my child's my age, by guaranteeing retirees that when you're retired, you'll have the same health benefit as your member of Congress.
Provided you get the support you need to make
that bill died in the Senate,
right?
A lot of bills. And the president's budget was similar to the one he proposed this year. It got voted down in the Senate 97 to nothing because it's not a real solution to our fiscal problems.
But you feel like you've got the support you need to make this happen in this?
We can pass it in the House of Representatives.
That's all you can do, right?
That's all we can do. We can put pressure on the Senate, and people are going to have to decide. In November, are we going to continue to go down the pathway of $26 trillion in debt, or are we going to have a pathway that's reasonable, that's common sense, that doesn't affect current recipients of Medicare, but changes it for the rest of my generation, and so our kids will have a future?
Well, let's talk about a future that involves jobs. And you come from a strong manufacturing background. You run Trace Diecast with your father. And so you know the importance of manufacturing, what it has meant to this country.
Right.
We're hearing a lot about, GM's doing better. I heard something the other day, a term called factory nostalgia, how we as Americans still have this nostalgic sense that we can go back to the way it was, when in reality that we will never see that again. However, we can look at something different.
Right.
We can go to something different.
Well, it's interesting. My dad worked for Ford and then lost his job at Ford and then came here to start Trace Diecast to sell the parts that he made for Ford. It was his idea behind it. But he went to work in the factory, and joined the union, did everything in the factory, worked his way through college. And so what I saw was when the factory plant shut down, I mean, the people I grew up with my whole life, they didn't have the skills to go somewhere else, but my father had because he'd worked his way through college. He actually started his own business and made lemonade out of lemons in situations. I've been through a plant closing and what it does to a community.
And
And so that really touches me, and you're right. You're not going to, my senior year in high school, it was a legitimate economic decision the day we showed up for football practice to say, I'm going to graduate and go work for Ford. That's what 80% of the people did. By the time we walked down the graduation path, Ford was closing. And so I'm part of that generation. You know, that was back when the Springsteen was singing about the river in Allentown. They're closing up. Remember that Billy Joel? It was a tumultuous time in America, but we innovated ourselves with high-tech manufacturing. So we can do manufacturing. We will do it, but it's not going to be you show up without any skills and earn a middle-class wage. That's why tech schools are important. Post-secondary education is important. Whether it's a college degree or a tool and die, you need to bring skills to the table to get the kind of productivity to pay the wages that you want. Well, and I'm a co-sponsor of a thing called the Workforce Investment Act.
Well, I want to talk a little bit, too, about the forum that you held earlier this week in Washington, D.C. If we could show some of that footage. Manufacturing, you had a number of people there to talk about, there you are, and you're talking about how you're going to bring jobs back to America. What did you find out?
We wanted to say, what can we do? And what can Washington do and get out of the way? And we had Mike Baker, who's from Hancock County, big aluminum industry in Hancock County, who came back and talked about what the EPA regulations were doing and threatening that industry. But what they really said was, you know, the wages, we don't want to bring back companies that are going to pay the same kind of wages as China. That's not improving American lives to have factories all over the place, but paying those kind of wages. So how can we bring factories that are productive? One is we have to have the skill level. You have to be productive in your skill. The other is the tax rates. We have the highest corporate tax burden of any industrialized country. President Obama actually has given a speech about that. I would do it different than he did, but at least he's recognizing the problem and trying to move forward. And we can work on that as long as we recognize the problem and want to solve it. And the other is regulatory, skills, and taxes.
Regulatory, skills, and taxes. We're going to talk more about that and the forum and what's happening in the Middle East when Outlook returns with Congressman Brett Guthrie. Stay with us. Outlook continues. We're talking with Congressman Brett Guthrie, and before the break we were talking about jobs, how you recently held a forum in Washington, D.C. and brought together a number of good minds, and I won't call it brainstorming, but it was more a sharing of ideas and on how we can bring jobs back to America. Before the break, you were talking about regulatory issues, tax issues, and skill issues. We're coming from a university as we tape this program, Western Kentucky University, and we know the importance of an education, but we're also realizing the importance of skills, of retooling, if you will, our workers.
Well, that was important. Because what happens now is that not everybody, in this economy, everybody's hurting almost at every level. But typically in the last few years, if you have a college degree, you have the opportunity to pursue your dreams and be successful. And the reason manufacturing is so important, because it gives people that aren't pursuing a college degree, not everybody has that aptitude. They're smart. They're just smart in a different way. And I learned at Trace Diecast when I was there. My brothers and father run it now. When I was there, you had a lot of people that were really smart. They didn't realize or nobody told them. And so they didn't get it in high school for some reason. And so we would send them, we had a very good program of sending people to tech school because we had to create industrial maintenance and tool and die. And you can look at over the gamut in medicine, you know, in lab techs and so forth. We can really earn a good middle class wage with those kinds of skills. And so I'm on a bill. I was actually on the committee last year. I switched to the Energy and Commerce Committee. And was the major sponsor now, a co-sponsor of a Workforce Investment Act where we do invest in people. If you look at trade assistance for people who lose their jobs, go to Campbellsville, which unfortunately I just lost Henry District. Wonderful place, but they had they call Union Underwear, I call Free the Loom, when they had the shutdown of the factories there and the plants there. I mean, there's still people hurting from that. I'm not saying that, but that's not a ghost town at all. It's actually got a vibrant economy. Amazon.com's there, and they brought in and trained people. And so now Amazon.com has big warehouses there.
But is it
so
that
those are the things we have to do.
The manufacturers don't have the funds to do those kinds of things anymore, or they need government incentives to make them do that?
Well, a couple of things is, you know, for manufacturers, like we did that in our company. A lot of manufacturing companies, they do training, but they want people to show up. Like a lot of people, if you're an accounting firm, they don't hire you and then pay for you to go get your accounting degree. They hire you after you get your accounting degree. So they are looking for skills ready to go. And they'll develop, most manufacturing companies that I know will develop people within their workforce once they have them in their workforce. But they need the skills when they first set up. At this forum, the National Association of Manufacturers said there's about 80,000 jobs out there that aren't filled just because they can't find the skills, that are manufacturing-based jobs without the skills.
That's a terrible excuse in this economy to be able to say that.
It is, and in our unemployment, we did some unemployment benefit extensions, but we did changes in the program. And if you don't have a GED, and you're on unemployment, you have to go get a GED. Because I'm telling you, if you don't have a GED, it's difficult to get a job anywhere now, other than minimum wage level jobs. And so we require that. And one of the compromises we did to get the unemployment insurance extended. But the tax issue is big. If you're an American company, the problem that the 35% tax rate, it really hurts medium-sized businesses, and those are the ones really growing and hiring people. But if you're an entertainment company and you've got a book of movies that you've created over the last few years, you can actually sell them to a China subsidiary, pay the capital gains on it. Then if you want to show them in the United States or in amusement parks or something like that, you pay the royalty. And so it's forcing companies to make decisions that aren't in the best interest of America and the companies really want to do. They don't really want to do that, but they say, well, you know, I'm
Sometimes
penalized
they have no
35% for doing it this way. I can do 10% in China, which is their tax. And I can
do the numbers.
Do the numbers when they're going to invest.
We're hearing a lot about insourcing. You know, we used to hear a lot about outsourcing. We're sending those jobs there. So insourcing is real. It's happening, and you're working to bring those jobs back here.
Well, what you're seeing in China is that they are creating a middle class. So as they create a middle class and looking for skills, a lot of the low skilled jobs went over, and masses of people were moving to the cities. And now the manufacturing that we're really competing to keep here, the automotive supply, those types of really nice wage manufacturing, they have to pay the wages too, because they're seeing their wages inflate. Where they were paying dollars a day, you know, they're now at several dollars an hour. Not where we are, but several dollars an hour. So the competitive advantage is starting to diminish with the Chinese wage rate. Like I said, our intent in this meeting wasn't how can we find the lowest common denominator to bring companies back, but how can we be productive and get out of people's way? Because even if you don't look at the wage rates, if all of a sudden you got to say I'm a 25% disadvantage from the tax code just by being in the United States, that really changes the game too.
That certainly is an effect.
Yeah.
But you know, you used the word a little while ago. You used the word middle class. The words. Do you believe we still have a middle class in America?
I believe we do. I mean, Bowling Green is most people in Bowling Green. We have people at all levels, but a lot of people in Bowling Green are middle class, and people are feeling squeezed though. I mean, that's the people who are most affected by the lower income, but by gas prices and so forth. But a lot of people who are middle class feel the squeeze because if you're the lower income, we're on a college campus, you can get a Pell Grant, and it helps you. You know, you don't have to pay it back. But if you're a middle class parent, now you got to write a check. And that's why we talked about Medicaid earlier, that squeezing state budgets and tuitions are rising. I mean, it's not cheap to go to college anymore.
Right.
And if you're a middle-class parent with 2 kids and you want to plan for their college, and it's expensive. And there's a lot of squeeze that comes from that.
Everybody's hurting. Everybody's
I hear that
hurting.
because my kids are that age, but that's those are the issues that we
from
look
experience,
at. I know.
yes. Now let's talk. We're quickly running out of time. The Middle East. It's just a volatile area. And so what do you see happening there? You
know, I wish I could look in a crystal ball and tell you exactly what's going to happen. It is, it's very concerning. It's something that we watch all the time, how it develops. You know, the democracy and the movement and the protests.
That we thought was maybe going to be a good thing.
Yeah, and it still may be a good thing. You see it in Syria, but it does bring instability. And, you know, when I was a kid growing up and I was in the military, we studied the Russians and the Americans, and as long as there were 2 big guys looking at each other, each one not wanting to blow each other up, it kind of made a stable world.
Sure.
But I certainly wouldn't want to go back to that world, even though, but now we're unstable. And we're seeing it particularly in the Middle East. And
with Iran and the nuclear weapons.
Particularly Iran and the nuclear weapons. We can't let them have a nuclear weapon. I'm one that we need to be very, very careful about using force. I mean, we need to be supportive of Israel. They're a democracy. They're our friend. And they're willing to, they stand between us and a lot of issues in the Middle East. I mean, they're a guard for us in the Middle East. We have to be supportive of Israel. But I would be very reluctant to use any kind of ground force in that area. I didn't do a career in the military, but I have a lot of friends who did. And the military has done a lot. And they'll do whatever we ask them to do. That's the kind of men and women we have serving. But their families have really been stressed out with 2 wars over the last 10 years. And I think it'd be very difficult to ask them to go into another theater of war.
Well, and I want to interject here because you and your family have been very supportive of veterans and veterans issues. We've got a lot of veterans, men and women, returning with TBI, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. And will we take action? Will we do something as a country to help those people?
Oh, we will. And I tell them, I see them all the time. They do Capitol tours, and I meet with them quite often. You see them in the hospitals in Washington, D.C. I've seen 2 that are quadro amputees. and their body armor saved them because they protected their organs, but they lost their limbs. And there's several with at least 1 or 2 limbs missing that I've seen several. And I'm involved with a group called Armed Forces Foundation that Kurt Busch, the NASCAR driver, is really big behind, so I'm going to plug for him. He really supports that and is a great, I know he's had a little stuff on the track, but he's great with our soldiers. And what I tell them, I say, I'm probably not going to be in Congress forever, but I'm telling you, we're going to take care of you when you're in your 20s. We're going to have to take care of these guys in their 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they're still going to have those issues. And I said, I'm always going to be your advocate. Whoever my follower is, yes, I'm going to wear them out if they don't take care of our veterans.
You heard it here. We've been talking with Congressman Brett Guthrie. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me
for
here.
sharing
Appreciate
time.
it.
And we want to remind you that you can connect with WKYU PBS on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll see that address on your screen. Until next time, I'm Barbara Deeb. Thanks for joining us on Outlook.